It was a quiet evening in a small neighborhood, the kind of place where people usually felt safe. The houses stood close together, each with trimmed lawns and warm lights glowing through the windows. Families were finishing dinner, kids were inside watching TV or finishing homework, and the streets were mostly empty. On nights like this, the loudest sounds usually came from dogs barking or cars pulling into driveways. But that night, everything changed in a way no one could have imagined. A call came into the local sheriff's office. The voice on the other end was shaky, filled with panic. Something terrible had happened in one of the homes. The details were not clear at first, just screaming, confusion, and then silence. The dispatcher sent officers right away, and within minutes, patrol cars raced down the narrow streets, red and blue lights flashing against the walls of nearby houses. Deputy Harris, a man who had worked in law enforcement for years, was among the first to arrive. He had seen his share of strange calls before, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to find. As he stepped out of his cruiser, the crisp night air carried a strange heaviness, almost as if the neighborhood itself knew something was wrong. Neighbors stood at a distance, whispering nervously, trying to figure out what had happened. Some clutched their phones, others held their children close, warning them not to get too close. The deputy walked quickly toward the house that was now surrounded by officers. The front door hung slightly open, swaying with the breeze. Flashlights cut through the darkness inside, revealing overturned furniture, broken glass, and a scene that told everyone this wasn't just an accident. Something violent had taken place here. But in the middle of all that chaos, something else caught the deputy's eye. Near the side of the house, crouched behind a bush, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, and his eyes wide with fear. He wasn't crying, but the way he clutched his knees to his chest showed he was terrified. At first, the deputy thought maybe the boy lived in the house. Maybe he was hiding after seeing something no child should ever have to see. But as he stepped closer, he realized there was something unusual about him. The boy didn't move when the flashlight shone in his direction. He didn't speak, didn't run, didn't even flinch. He just stared back, silent, like he was frozen in time. "Hey, buddy," the deputy said gently, lowering his voice so it wouldn't scare him. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" The boy didn't answer. His lips pressed tightly together and his breathing quickened. The deputy could see the child's hands trembling against his knees. He crouched down, trying not to look intimidating. But the boy still said nothing. The other officers were busy inside the house, gathering evidence and checking for survivors, but the deputy stayed focused on the boy. Something in his gut told him that this child was important to the whole picture. The silence wasn't just fear. It felt like the boy knew more than he was letting on. Neighbors began murmuring again, pointing toward the child. One woman whispered that she had never seen him before in the neighborhood. Another insisted he didn't belong to the family that lived in the house. Yet here he was, sitting just steps away from a crime scene that no one could explain. The deputy carefully extended his hand, offering comfort without forcing the boy to move. Slowly, after what felt like forever, the boy let his grip on his knees loosen. His small fingers brushed against the deputy's hand, almost as if he wanted to trust him but wasn't sure if he should. The deputy guided him gently away from the bush and toward the patrol car. The boy still hadn't spoken a single word. He just kept glancing back at the house, as though something inside it still had a hold on him. Once seated safely in the back of the car, the boy stared out the window, his expression blank. The flashing lights from the police cars reflected in his eyes, but he seemed lost in another world. The deputy tried again. "You're not in trouble. I just need to know what you saw, if you saw anything. Can you tell me?" The boy slowly turned his head and looked straight at the deputy. For the first time, he whispered something. It wasn't a name. It wasn't an explanation. It was only one short sentence, barely audible. "You already know me." The words sent a chill through the deputy. He froze for a second, replaying the boy's voice in his mind. What could that possibly mean? He had never seen this child before in his life. How could he already know him? The deputy decided not to push too hard right away. He knew sometimes children needed time before they could open up about traumatic events. Still, there was something about this boy that unsettled him. Back at the scene, the investigation continued. Officers searched the house from top to bottom. They confirmed what everyone already feared. There had been violence inside, though the details were too grim to share with the crowd gathering outside. Evidence markers lined the floor, photographs were taken, and the coroner's van quietly pulled up. But while all that unfolded, the deputy couldn't stop thinking about the boy. Who was he? Why was he here? And what did he mean by those strange words? He checked with the neighbors again, asking if anyone recognized him. Each person shook their head. Some even stepped back as though the boy's very presence unsettled them. No one could remember ever seeing him in the area. No missing person posters matched his face. No parent came rushing out to claim him. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere, right at the scene of one of the most disturbing calls the town had faced in years. As the night dragged on, the boy sat quietly in the patrol car. He didn't ask for food, water, or even a blanket. He just stayed silent, watching, waiting. His small frame looked almost fragile under the harsh glow of the streetlights. The deputy felt torn. On one hand, his job was to focus on the crime scene, to gather facts and keep everything organized. On the other hand, something about this child felt like the key to everything. His silence wasn't ordinary, and his words carried a weight that didn't make sense yet. When the officers finally wrapped up the first stage of the investigation, the deputy made a decision. He would personally stay with the boy, no matter how long it took to figure out who he was and what he had seen. As he drove away from the neighborhood with the boy sitting quietly behind him, the deputy couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another case. The child was more than a witness. Somehow he was connected to everything that had happened. And though the deputy didn't know it yet, the boy's presence would unravel a mystery that went far deeper than anyone could imagine. The night that began with flashing lights and frightened whispers was only the beginning of a story that would soon challenge everything the deputy thought he knew about truth, about identity, and about himself. The boy was now at the station, sitting quietly in a chair that seemed too big for him. His small frame almost disappeared against the hard plastic seat. The deputy stayed nearby, keeping a watchful eye. He had seen children shaken up before, children who had witnessed accidents, fights, or other painful events. But this was different. The silence around this boy wasn't just fear, it felt deeper, like he was carrying something that no child should ever have to hold inside. The station wasn't busy that night. Phones rang in the background. Papers shuffled across desks, and the hum of a vending machine filled the quiet moments. The boy didn't flinch at any of it. He just sat with his hands folded tightly in his lap, staring at the floor. From time to time, he would glance at the deputy, almost as if he wanted to say something but stopped himself before the words could come out. The deputy offered him water, but the boy only held the cup without drinking. When asked if he was hungry, he shook his head. Hours had passed since he was found near the house, yet he remained still, calm on the outside. But something about his eyes showed a storm hidden within. Neighbors had already been questioned. None of them knew who the boy was. They had never seen him walking to school, never spotted him playing in the yards, never noticed him in the local shops. It was strange. In a small neighborhood, faces were familiar. Even if you didn't know someone personally, you usually recognized them from a distance. But this child seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The deputy decided to try again. He sat across from the boy, keeping his tone soft and steady. "I want to help you," he said. "But I need you to tell me something about yourself. Anything. Your name, where you live, your family. Anything at all." The boy's lips pressed together, and for a long moment it seemed like he wouldn't respond. Then slowly he lifted his head. His eyes were dark, intense for someone so young. He didn't blink as he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost like he was afraid the words themselves carried power. "I know that house," he whispered. The deputy leaned in slightly. "You do? How?" The boy didn't answer directly. Instead, he reached for a piece of paper on the desk. Without asking, he took the pencil that had been lying nearby. His small hand moved quickly, sketching rough lines across the page. The deputy watched in silence as the drawing took shape. At first, it looked like a simple outline of a house. But then, as the boy added more detail, it became clear. It was the same house from the crime scene. He drew the front door, the broken window on the side, and even the pattern of the fence that wrapped around the yard. He didn't stop there. He moved inside the drawing, marking out rooms, stairs, and hallways. It was as if he knew the house inside and out. The deputy felt his chest tighten. None of this had been shown to the public yet. The scene was still being processed, and no photos had been released. Yet the boy's drawing matched the house perfectly, down to details that only someone inside would know. When the drawing was finished, the boy placed the pencil down and pushed the paper forward. He didn't look at the deputy. He just whispered, "I've been there." The deputy's mind raced. If the boy had been inside the house, was he a witness? Could he have seen what happened? Or worse, was he somehow connected to it in a way no one understood yet? He asked carefully, "Did you see what happened in that house tonight?" The boy finally looked up again. His expression was unreadable, a mix of fear and something else the deputy couldn't quite name. He shook his head slowly, but then he added, "I remember things." The deputy pressed gently. "What kind of things?" The boy's hand trembled as he tapped the paper. Rooms, places, people. He hesitated before finishing his thought. "But I don't know if they're mine." That statement stopped the deputy cold. Children didn't usually talk like that. What did he mean they weren't his? Memories couldn't belong to someone else, unless this boy was trying to explain something bigger than anyone could grasp. For the next hour, the deputy asked more questions, but the answers didn't add up. The boy said he didn't go to school nearby. He couldn't give a name for his parents. When asked about his home, he simply said, "It doesn't stay the same." At one point, another officer entered the room holding a folder of missing children reports. They spread the photos across the desk, sliding them one by one toward the boy. "Do you see yourself here? Do you recognize anyone?" The boy glanced at the pictures but didn't point to any. Instead, he pushed them back. "I'm not in those," he said quietly. The deputy knew something was off. He had worked cases where children were scared to reveal the truth because of threats or trauma. But this felt different. This child wasn't hiding from someone, he was hiding from something. Later that night, the deputy stepped away from the room and spoke to his colleagues. They were puzzled too. No records matched the boy. No missing child alerts had gone out with his description. There was nothing, no birth certificate, no school enrollment, no hospital files. It was like the boy didn't exist in any system. When the deputy returned to the room, he found the boy had pulled the paper close again. He was drawing more. This time he sketched faces. One of them was faint, almost incomplete, as if he wasn't sure how to finish it. The deputy leaned closer and realized the face looked eerily familiar. It resembled someone from the family that lived in the house, someone who was now gone. The boy noticed the deputy staring and quickly turned the paper over, as if he didn't want him to see anymore. His small voice broke the silence. "I told you. You already know me." The deputy felt a chill run down his spine. The words were the same as before, but now, after the drawings and the strange knowledge, they carried even more weight. The night ended with no clear answers. The boy was placed in temporary protective care, somewhere safe until they could figure out who he was and how he connected to the house. But as the deputy drove home in the early hours of the morning, the image of the boy's eyes in his drawing stayed with him. He couldn't explain it, but deep down, he knew this wasn't just about a crime scene anymore. The boy's silence, his words, and his shifting behavior pointed to something much bigger, something that would unravel piece by piece and possibly turn everything upside down. The case had started with tragedy, but now it was leading into uncharted territory. The deputy had no idea what was waiting for him next, but he felt certain of one thing. This child was holding the key to a truth no one was ready to face, and whatever that truth was, it would soon change everything. The next morning, the deputy came back to the station with little sleep. His mind had been racing all night. The boy's face, his drawings, and especially those strange words, "You already know me," kept echoing in his thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a normal case. Something about the child didn't fit into the usual patterns of missing persons or trauma cases. It felt different. The first thing he did was check in with the child. He had been placed in a quiet room with a social worker to watch over him through the night. When the deputy walked in, the boy was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out of the window. His small hands rested in his lap, and he didn't look away from the glass when the deputy entered. "How are you feeling today?" the deputy asked softly. The boy didn't answer. He only turned his head slightly, then returned his gaze to the window. It wasn't the usual stubborn silence of a child who didn't want to talk. It was something heavier, like his silence carried its own meaning. The deputy sat down across from him. "I want to understand what's going on. If you help me, maybe we can figure this out together." This time the boy looked at him. His dark eyes seemed deeper than before, almost older. Then he whispered, "Things change when you look too closely." The deputy frowned. "What do you mean?" But the boy didn't explain. He only shook his head and turned away again. Later that day, the deputy decided to dig into records more seriously. If the boy wasn't in any local system, maybe there was a mistake, or maybe he had come from somewhere farther away. He called nearby schools, hospitals, even shelters. Nothing. Not a single match. It was like the child had never existed on paper. The deputy printed a photo of the boy, taken the night before when he had first been brought in. At first it looked normal. The boy's skin tone, his dark hair, his thin frame, all captured in the harsh flash of the camera. But when the deputy looked at the copy again later, he thought something seemed off. He rubbed his eyes, thinking maybe he was just exhausted. But when he compared it side by side with the original, he saw it. In the newer copy, the boy's features looked slightly different. His skin looked a shade lighter, his hair seemed straighter, his jawline a bit sharper. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was noticeable if you paid attention. The deputy brought the photo to one of his colleagues. "Do you see anything strange about this?" The other officer glanced at it. "Looks normal to me, why?" The deputy didn't push further. He just nodded and slipped the photo back into the folder. But inside his unease grew. He knew what he saw. He wasn't imagining it. The boy's appearance was changing. That night, the deputy couldn't resist returning to the boy's room to check on him again. He opened the door quietly. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor this time, papers spread around him. He was drawing again. The deputy walked closer and froze. The papers showed faces of people who were part of the case. One was a neighbor who had given a statement. Another was an officer who had been at the scene. The details were strikingly accurate, almost as if the boy had studied them for hours. Though he hadn't been near those people long enough to draw them with such precision. The deputy asked softly, "Why are you drawing these people?" The boy didn't stop sketching. He said, "Because they don't stay the same. I have to remember them before they change." The deputy felt a chill crawl down his spine. "What do you mean by change?" The boy put the pencil down and finally looked up at him. "Like me." The deputy's stomach tightened. He sat on the floor beside the boy, trying to keep his voice calm. "You think you're changing?" The boy didn't answer directly. Instead, he held up a drawing he had made of himself. The sketch showed him with darker skin and curly hair, the way he had looked when the deputy first found him. Then, next to it, was another drawing of himself, with lighter skin and straighter hair, almost like a different person. The deputy stared at the two drawings. They were both him and yet not the same. The boy whispered, "I don't know which one is real." The deputy felt his breath catch. He had never faced anything like this before. Was this a psychological issue? Trauma twisting the boy's self-image? Or was it something else, something unexplainable? The next day, the deputy took the boy's photo again, this time using his own phone to be sure. When he looked at the picture moments later, his heart skipped. The boy's appearance had shifted even more. His skin was noticeably lighter now, his features softer, almost blending into a different identity. The deputy showed the photo to the boy. "Do you see this?" The boy stared at it quietly, then said, "That's what I told you. It doesn't stay the same." The deputy pressed his hand against his forehead, trying to make sense of it. If anyone else saw this, would they believe it? Or would they say it was just lighting or his imagination? Later, when the deputy returned to his desk, he searched through old files looking for anything similar. Cases where a child's identity had shifted, where appearance didn't stay consistent. There was nothing. No case, no medical record, nothing that explained what was happening here. That night, when the station grew quiet and most people had gone home, the deputy sat alone with the boy again. "Why do you think this is happening to you?" he asked. The boy looked down at his hands. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I don't belong to just one life. I belong to two." The deputy's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" The boy's eyes lifted slowly. There was sadness in them, but also a kind of wisdom no child his age should carry. "You'll see. You'll see when the rest of it comes." The deputy sat in silence, unsure how to respond. He wanted to comfort the boy, to tell him everything would be all right. But deep inside, he wasn't sure if it would. As he left the room that night, the deputy looked back one last time. The boy was sitting quietly again, staring at his own reflection in the window. And for a moment in the dim glass, the deputy thought he saw not one reflection but two faces overlapping, shifting, almost as if the child was caught between two identities, two versions of himself. The deputy walked away with a heavy heart. This case was no longer just about a crime scene. It was about a mystery far bigger than he had ever handled. And the boy at the center of it all wasn't just a witness anymore. He was something else, something that defied every explanation the deputy had ever known. And as much as he tried to prepare himself, the deputy had no idea that what was coming next would not only change the boy's life, but his own understanding of reality itself. The following days felt heavier with every passing hour. The deputy spent most of his time trying to piece together the mystery of the boy. He had dealt with missing children cases before, but this was nothing like that. The boy wasn't just missing from records. He seemed to be missing from the normal rules of life itself. Each time the deputy looked at him, he noticed the changes were becoming more obvious. At first it was small, skin tone shifting, hair texture slightly different, eye color seeming to flicker in different lights. But now, the changes were clear enough that the deputy no longer trusted photographs. What he saw in person didn't always match what was captured in pictures. One afternoon, while the boy sat in a quiet corner of the room, sketching again, the deputy entered with a calm tone. "How are you feeling today?" The boy looked up and the deputy's heart skipped. His face looked different. His skin was pale now, lighter than before, his features softer, more angular. The child in front of him did not fully resemble the boy he had first rescued from the crime scene. It was like watching two different lives blend into one body. The deputy tried not to show his shock. He sat down slowly. "You look different." The boy lowered his eyes. "I told you," he whispered. "Things change." The deputy leaned forward, speaking softly. "Why is it happening? Do you know?" The boy didn't answer right away. He just kept drawing. When he finally spoke, his words were heavy. "Because I'm not supposed to be just one person. I'm two, and now, it's showing." The deputy felt a chill crawl through him. He didn't know what to say. The boy's voice carried both fear and certainty, like he was stating something he had known deep down all along. That evening, things took a turn. The boy had been sitting quietly at the station when suddenly his small body shook and he fell to the ground. The deputy rushed forward, kneeling beside him. The boy's hands trembled, his eyes rolled back for a moment, and his breathing grew uneven. "Stay with me," the deputy said firmly, holding him steady. A medic was called, and within minutes the boy was rushed to the nearest clinic. The deputy rode along, his heart pounding. He couldn't explain why he felt so connected to this child, but the thought of losing him filled him with a sense of dread. At the clinic, doctors examined the boy, running tests and checking for any underlying conditions. But as the deputy watched, something happened that none of them could explain. When the boy regained consciousness, his skin had changed even more. He was no longer the black child the deputy had first seen hiding behind the bush. His skin was now unmistakably white, his hair straight, his face reshaped. The room fell silent. The doctors exchanged baffled looks. One of them muttered that such a transformation wasn't possible. They checked the lights, the monitors, even the deputy's account of how the boy had looked before. Nothing could explain it. The boy slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was heavy, almost tired, but he whispered, "Now you see." The deputy sat stunned. He couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't a trick of the light or his imagination or stress. The boy had truly changed in front of his eyes. Later, when the doctors stepped out to discuss the case, the deputy stayed by the boy's side. He spoke softly. "Why did this happen to you? Can you tell me the truth now?" The boy's voice was weak, but his words cut deep. "Because I was both of them. I was the child you found, and I was the one who lived another life. I'm the same, but not the same." The deputy struggled to take it in. "You mean you're connected to the family from the house?" The boy nodded slowly. His eyes filled with a sadness that felt far too heavy for someone his age. "Yes, I was part of them. But I was hidden. One side of me was never supposed to be seen. Now both are coming out." The deputy leaned back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. He had heard stories of families with secrets, hidden relatives, unspoken histories, lives lived in the shadows. But to see it manifest physically in a child was beyond anything he could have imagined. Over the next hours, the boy rested, while the deputy sat nearby, lost in thought. He thought about the crime scene, the silence of the neighbors, the way no one claimed the boy. Maybe they didn't because they couldn't. Maybe this child carried a truth so uncomfortable that no one wanted to admit it. When the boy awoke again, he reached for the deputy's hand. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "You have to understand. I'm not lying. I'm not making this up. It's real, I am both. And that house, that family, they knew it too." The deputy held his hand gently. "I believe you," he said, and for the first time he truly meant it. That night the deputy walked out of the clinic and stood under the cold sky, his breath visible in the air. His heart was heavy, but there was also clarity. The boy wasn't just a random witness. He wasn't a stranger who had wandered into a crime scene. He was the key. The boy's shifting identity was tied to the family's past, and unless the deputy uncovered the full story, the truth would remain buried forever. The next day, the deputy began asking deeper questions about the family and the house. He looked through old records, spoke quietly with people who had known them for years, and discovered whispers of a history few wanted to talk about. There were rumors of relatives who had lived double lives, hiding parts of themselves from the world, trying to fit into places that wouldn't accept them fully. The more he dug, the more he realized this wasn't just about the present, it was about generations. The boy wasn't only carrying his own identity, he was carrying the weight of an entire family's hidden truth, a truth that had been buried and denied but now had forced its way into the open. That night, back at the clinic, the boy looked weaker but calmer. His appearance no longer shifted back and forth. He remained in his lighter form, his features settled. He whispered one final line before drifting into sleep. "Now you know why I change. Because I was never allowed to be one." The deputy sat beside him, his chest heavy with a mix of sorrow and determination. This child wasn't just a witness or a victim. He was a living piece of truth that no one had been ready to face. And now it was the deputy's responsibility to bring that truth to light. What had started as a strange discovery at a crime scene had turned into something much larger. The boy's transformation was not just physical, it was the breaking of silence, the revealing of secrets that had lived in the shadows for far too long. The deputy knew that from this moment forward, his investigation wouldn't just be about solving a crime. It would be about uncovering the hidden history that explained everything. And he also knew that whatever answers he found, his life and the boy's would never be the same again. The days that followed were heavy with questions, but slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The deputy couldn't get the boy's words out of his mind. "I was never allowed to be one." Those words carried the weight of generations, and the more he looked into the family's past, the more he realized just how true they were. The family from the house wasn't ordinary. On the surface, they looked like any other household in the neighborhood, hard-working, private, keeping to themselves. But old records, quiet whispers from older neighbors, and fragments of history revealed something else. Years ago, there had been a divide in the family tree. Some had chosen to live one way, hiding parts of who they were, while others had carried their lives differently, never speaking of the divide again. The boy was not simply a witness. He was a living connection between both sides. His very existence represented two identities that had once been forced apart. And now in him, they came back together. The deputy sat one evening at his desk, staring at the documents spread before him. Old photographs, census files, birth certificates, all told a story of a family that had struggled with identity, acceptance, and silence. Some relatives had lived one life in one community, while others lived entirely different lives elsewhere. That hidden history had been buried for so long, but now it had returned through the boy. The deputy realized the crime itself, the violence in that house, was tied to secrets. Secrets that some had wanted to erase forever. The boy had survived not just because he was lucky, but because he was meant to reveal what had been hidden. When he visited the boy at the clinic again, he found him sitting quietly, looking out of the window just like before. His appearance had settled into his lighter form, but his eyes still carried the weight of both lives. The deputy sat beside him. "I think I understand now," he said softly. The boy turned to him slowly. "Do you?" "Yes," the deputy answered. "You were never just one child. You were part of two histories. Both lived inside you, even when others tried to deny it. The boy's lips trembled, and for the first time since the deputy had found him, he let out a quiet sob. "I didn't want to change," he whispered. "I just wanted to be me." The deputy's chest tightened. He reached over, resting a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You are you," he said firmly. "And that's enough. More than enough." For a moment the child leaned into the comfort, allowing himself to be seen for who he truly was, no longer hiding, no longer silent. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed the rest. The family had lived with the burden of secrecy for decades. Some had chosen to hide their lineage to protect themselves from judgment, while others carried the pain of being erased. The boy had been born into the middle of that silence, and his very existence forced the truth out into the open. The neighbors who once said they didn't know him weren't lying. They truly didn't know who he was because his identity had been kept hidden, split between two sides of a story no one wanted to tell. The tragedy in the house had brought everything crashing down, but it had also brought the boy's truth to light. And now, with the deputy by his side, he no longer had to carry the weight alone. The boy stayed under protective care, but slowly, with time, he began to open up more. He spoke of memories that didn't always feel like his own, stories that seemed to belong to someone else yet lived inside him. The deputy realized those weren't just memories. They were echoes, passed down, unspoken truths trying to find a voice. One evening, as the deputy walked him outside for fresh air, the boy looked up at the sky. "Do you think I'll stay like this now?" he asked quietly. The deputy looked at him carefully. His features were steady, his skin pale under the glow of the streetlight. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but maybe it doesn't matter. Because whatever you look like, you're still you. That's what matters." The boy nodded slowly. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile, even if only a little. In the weeks that followed, the case grew quieter in the public eye. People moved on, as they often did. But for the deputy, the story never faded. It became part of him, a reminder that not all truths are simple, and not all mysteries can be explained by rules or science. Sometimes truth lives in the people who carry it, even if their very existence defies explanation. The boy's life remained complicated, but he was no longer invisible. He was no longer just the silent child at the edge of a crime scene. He was seen, he was believed, and with that came a kind of freedom he had never known before. One night, as the deputy dropped by to check on him again, the boy looked up and said something that stayed with him forever. "You didn't run away when I changed," he said quietly. "Everyone else looked at me like I was wrong. But you stayed." The deputy's throat tightened. "Because you're not wrong," he said simply. "You're just you, and that's the truth." The boy looked at him with eyes that seemed older than his years. "Then maybe that's enough." And for the first time, the deputy felt the weight of the mystery lift just a little. The boy's existence would always be complex, but he no longer had to carry the burden of being unseen. His truth, though difficult, had finally found a place in the light. As the deputy walked out into the cool night air, he realized his own life had been changed too. He had gone into this case thinking it was about a crime, about finding answers in evidence and reports, but what he had really found was a story about identity, about belonging, and about the courage it takes to exist when the world doesn't understand you. The boy had taught him that truth doesn't always fit neatly into categories. Sometimes it shifts, sometimes it transforms, and sometimes it exists in ways no one expects. But it is still truth, and it still matters. From that night on, the deputy carried that lesson with him. Long after the lights of the crime scene faded and the neighborhood went quiet again. And somewhere, the boy carried it too. No longer just a shadow at the edge of tragedy, but a living reminder that being seen, truly seen, is the most powerful truth of all.